Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our live conversations from the couch. One of my favorite parts of this whole Willow Tree Summit. My name is Dina. I am the founder of Pain to Possibilities and the Change Pain Academy. And today we are introducing our amazing guest, Fred Rutman. Fred has agreed to come on with the conversations from the couch because he has his own story to tell and is also doing some amazing work behind the scenes with people in his group around intermittent fasting. So we're going to get into a whole bunch of different details, and then we will eventually also get into the talks of the day and get Fred's perspective on those as well. But I want to introduce you guys to Fred first. So Fred is an intermittent faster and coach, death and brain trauma survivor. He's also the author of The Summer I Died 20 Times. Fred is a masterclass in overcoming adversity, resilience, PTSD, and post-concussion syndrome. Fred, I'm sure there's so much more to you than that. I know we'll get into it, but
wait, who wrote that?
That was one of the podcasts actually that you were on. You are on so many podcasts. I stole that one. So hopefully it's pretty close to the real truth, but let's find out a little bit about you. Tell us and our listeners, Fred, a little bit about your backstory.
So my backstory is sort of multi-layered. I'm from Winnipeg originally, and my first trauma was a trauma I didn't even know I had. So apparently I found out in my mid-30s that I had had a stroke just before or just after I was born.
Oh.
Excuse me. So I had all these impairments. I have a condition called hemiparesis. So I have a little bit of paralysis down the entire left side of my body. And I knew something was wrong with me, but there was just no way to articulate.
Right.
Because nobody was familiar with what had happened to me.
No.
So I ended up meeting a psychologist through my sister, and I ended up calling them the brain trainers. So, and I just worked with them a lot on trying to jumpstart my neurology, I guess. And they did a lot of really good work for me. But, you know, early 90s, it only took me so far.
Right.
And so I was just, you know, piddling along, trying to get my life on track. And then in Toronto, I ended up going into academia from the business world. So I was a marketer and strategist and things like that. And then in 2009, my body just totally failed me. And I started what the doctors thought was randomly passing out. And almost every time I passed out, I would hit my head on, you know, whatever was the hardest thing in the area. So I suffered a whole bunch of concussions, and we later found out that my heart had been stopping.
Oh, wow.
And that I had been clinically dead about 20 times. So for the audience, the definition of clinically dead I'm using is kind of a standard, but there's different definitions. So it's when your heart doesn't beat for 30 seconds and you don't breathe for 30 seconds, both at the same time.
Wow.
So,
okay. Good clarification. Thank you.
So,
wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So now before we go on to talk a little bit more about your story, I did listen to some of the podcasts you had done beforehand because I was really curious about your story. But for all of our presenters, I'm always curious to how does it feel to talk about it as much as you do? You know, is it helpful? Do you find it difficult to talk about?
Sometimes I find it difficult. I'm prone to flooding. We've worked on this with my psychiatrist for quite a long time. And again, if the audience doesn't know flooding, it's just when you get hit with these waves of emotion that you can't control. And, you know, it's basically a tsunami just hits you. And if you're giving a speech at the time or a talk, so I always warn the audience that this might happen to me. So audience, this might happen to me.
Right, good call.
And, you know, it's it almost gives a little bit of credibility to the story you're telling, because the longer version of my story is just so whacked that even doctors don't believe it. They have my charts.
Yeah.
It's written in front of them and they don't believe it.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that happens often, doesn't it? It's interesting. I am hearing more and more about infant stroke It's I think we are coming out of the dark slowly but surely with a lot of things, that being one of them. So
Yeah.
with your experience, you have written a book. Can you tell our listeners a little
Yes.
bit about the book?
Sure. So the title is The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what happened to me. And one of my good friends, Deanna Petrini, I call her the trophy wife because her husband is he sells trophies. So she gave me the nickname Repeatedly Dead Fred.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's what I kind of use as my little branding efforts. So I've written a book about, everything that's happened to me, all the medical misdiagnoses. There's some dark humor. There's a little bit of sarcasm, just a little. Some jokes that you write only for yourself
Right.
because, you know,
Sometimes you need to
sometimes you
laugh.
just have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a healthy thing to do to take the pressure off.
Right.
And there's a lot of cognitive bias that went on in the medical world. And as I told you off the air, about that certain hospital I ended up in.
Right.
And I was lucky to get out of there alive. Literally.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell your story. Absolutely. So just you mentioned a little bit about the writing process, or I'm going to ask you about the writing process. But before we do that, how do you feel humor has really helped you through all of this?
It's been a mainstay of keeping me healthy-ish. I guess since I was a child when I didn't even know I had trauma. So, it was more of a self-defense mechanism when I was younger. And sometimes I got a little caustic or, beyond funny. It was, digging.
Unhealthy.
More for the other person because I was pretty caustic in some of my comments. But as I matured, it's become a positive thing. With all my teaching, I had to learn to tamp it down, and I took some improv.
Right. Oh, good for you.
Yeah. So it's all part of a healing and maturing process.
Yeah.
That you can't really force. You have to want it for one thing, and you have to believe. And I think Robin talked about that in her section.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. But yeah, the whole belief part is definitely important. We did have one of our presenters, which wasn't on your day to listen to, but actually on Friday, pardon me, about writing your story. How do you feel writing your story has helped you manage pain and your health?
That's interesting because I didn't intend to write a book.
Oh, really?
Early on, I tried to do some journaling. So everybody has a nickname in my book except for Jen Stevens, I think, who's my fasting guru. So Dr. Plié is my psychiatrist. So Plié, like she was a ballerina. And she suggested journaling to me, but I just wasn't consistent. But after a couple of years of telling people my initial story, I started to realize that people were fascinated with my story. And so then I started trying to journal a little more. And then somebody suggested I enter a short story writing contest, but I only had a week. So I started jotting, and when you just start off writing, even though I've written professionally as a marketer, it's an entirely different animal to write a story.
Right.
And so I went over the word limit, like just in the week, and I couldn't enter the contest. Then I just kept writing, and then I had a few more traumas and botched surgeries and dead some more and repeatedly dead, I guess. And but then over COVID, I was actually able to sit down on a consistent basis and write. And I found a couple of things. One, how grateful I am to be alive.
Right.
But two, how crap I've been treated. And I'm not trying to blame the medical system.
No, but
the
you have
system's the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like the amount of stuff that happened to me is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And statistically, I shouldn't be alive, never mind any level of functional.
Mm.
So writing this book brought out all sorts of emotions, and my memories didn't come back to me in a linear fashion.
Ah.
So, writing about, say, item M on the list brought back what will become item C.
Mm.
So, so
Wow.
after talking with a few people, I decided not to try and keep it so linear.
Mhm.
I was going to write it as a brain damaged person.
Right.
And so I do a lot of time traveling.
Hmm.
We're over here and we're over
Yes.
there. And for some people, that's a very difficult read.
Right.
And for other people, it's great because it's the most unique style of writing they've ever seen.
And it might make sense to a good part of the population too. So
I hope so.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. I love that you did that. I love that it just kind of came out, regardless of what the
Mhm.
process was. So sorry
Mhm.
about my dog in the background. Okay.
That's
You did
okay.
mention Robin, and maybe we'll start off
Mhm.
with her session. First of all, have you heard of EMDR or have you had any experience with EMDR?
I have heard about it. A lot of people think it's like the newest woo-woo thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as I mentioned, I was talking with Dr. Plier, and she said when she was doing her residency
Hmm.
at Mount Sinai Hospital, which has a pretty good psych ward,
Yeah.
they were using that, and I guess that's in the early 2000s.
Oh, amazing.
And with many modalities, it works for some people,
Right.
and it doesn't work for others. But I
Exactly.
think the important thing is that you try. Like if
Mhm.
one thing's not working, you give it a good shot and
Yeah.
then try something else.
Exactly.
And I understand the theory behind it,
Mhm.
um, and that it's supposed to mimic what goes on in REM sleep.
Mhm.
Except, REM is when you're subconscious, and this therapy is when you're awake, and there has to be
Right.
some sort of bridge. And some people can make that jump really easily,
Yeah.
and some people can't.
Right. No, that's actually a really good perspective on it. And interesting you pulled that up because the two conversations that two of the three from today, we're talking about
Mhm.
your subconscious, your conscious, and in two different perspectives. So one in the
Mhm.
EMDR and one in hypnotherapy. So good
Yeah,
catch there.
yeah. And I think overall, if you want me to keep going or you want to
Sure.
ask me another
Yeah, no,
question,
go for it. Go for it.
in intermittent fasting, we talk a lot about bioindividuality and how everybody's gut biome
Yes.
really runs the show.
Yes.
It really truly does.
Yeah.
And but just as we're all bio individuals, we're all, I guess, bio subconscious develop or some version.
Yeah.
Like my subconscious is not going to work like yours does, or
No,
like Barb's
exactly.
does, or
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
So it's all like a fingerprint for most
Right.
of us.
Yep. And a snowflake. We're all unique. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the intermittent fasting that you have been doing and how it's helped
Mhm.
you. And maybe if we could start off with for our listeners who don't know much about it, can you give us a little background on what the intermittent fasting is?
Sure. So intermittent fasting is setting up a designated time for you to eat
Mhm.
and to not eat.
Mhm.
It's not a diet. It doesn't tell you what to eat.
Mhm.
You figure that out on your own.
Mhm.
And just the quick disclaimer: it's not recommended for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding,
Mhm.
or if you've had, an eating disorder.
Right. Right.
So getting
Okay.
that out of the
Thank
way.
you. Yep. Thank you.
So um, what intermittent fasting does is it starts to re-regulate your hormones and gives your body a rest.
Mm.
So it if you have, say, a window of 16:8, that means you'll be fasting for 16 hours and an eating window of 8 hours.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you're supposed to eat for 8 hours.
Right.
It means
Why
in
not?
that period, you can have some, reasonable food choices, and,
Yes.
and you'll get better at that over time.
Hmm.
So today, for example, I did a 22-2.
Okay.
So 22-hour fast and 2-hour eating window, which
Oh, wow.
I sort of interrupted to come online because I was running late. So
Oh, sorry about
I'm
that.
going to be having a cold falafel when we finish.
Uh, okay, so how does it work as far as the timing? Like, how did you know what time frames to be working with? Was there some guidance for you, or how did you get into the numbers part?
Well, first I read Dr. Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code,
Okay,
and that's a really good sciencey book, but it really doesn't tell you how to fast.
right.
Then my work wife actually told me about Jen Stevens, and she
Okay.
had written a book, Delay, Don't Deny, which is a lot better at instructing people how to do the actual fast and some tweaks.
Okay.
And then she came up with a book called Fast, Feast, Repeat.
Hmm.
And that's a New York Times bestseller, and it has been for a couple of years already.
Hmm.
And it really gets into the nitty gritty of, how do you fast and how do you pick your fasting times and
Hmm.
all the different types of fasting that you can do. If you're going to fast every day or every other day, or you can do
Hmm.
one longer fast a week,
Hmm.
and they all have, their own little code names and stuff like that.
Right.
So OMAD means 1 meal a day.
Oh,
So that's what I do.
okay. Now, I'm sure there's a ton we could talk about when it comes to intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, I know a little bit about it, but I'm not by any
Mhm.
means a nutritionist or a dietitian. But what sorts of things are you seeing? And I think sometimes those are the best examples to give is when you're seeing it within the group of people that you're working with.
Mhm. So Jin started a Facebook group for fasting,
Hmm.
and it ended up having about 350,000 members. And
Whoa.
I was a moderator.
Okay.
So, I mean, this just took off like crazy.
Hmm.
And so you see reporting from people who are actually doing the fasting.
Hmm.
And it's not a lab experiment,
Hmm.
it's real life.
Right.
And I know for myself, I reversed my type 2 diabetes.
Hmm.
Um, in less than 6 months, I was off insulin.
Hmm.
Uh, my sleep apnea is gone. My asthma is gone.
Hmm.
I had some diabetic retinopathy in my eye,
Hmm.
and it's gone. And the doctors were like, "We have never seen that before. You
Hmm.
can't reverse sleep apnea. You just can't."
Wow.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
and um, all my body-wide inflammation
Yeah.
has gone away. My
Yeah.
body used to ache. Like it was a struggle to get out of bed.
Hmm.
I don't have an ache or pain in my body.
Hmm.
So we call these the non-scale victories.
Yeah, right. And if I could interject, do you feel like combining the intermittent fasting with the therapy that you've been doing or had done in the past was a
Mhm.
good combination?
Yes. Intermittent fasting is sort of like a health plan with the side benefit of weight loss.
Okay.
So, your body, as the other three guests have talked about, your body wants to heal itself.
Right.
But, often because of diet or other factors, we get in the way of that.
Hmm.
And, intermittent fasting clears the way for all these hormones to get balanced out and to get back in touch with your body's signals and all
Right.
those things. And uh, it spurs brain derived neurotropic factors, BDNF.
Okay.
And that's what helps your neurological system rebuild itself.
Mhm.
And so it's just
Wow.
one of the things it does.
Okay. I'm after we get off this conversation, I'm going to
Mhm.
go and see if I can seek out that book because I am the science gal that likes to do a little bit of background check and understand what's going on. I do know there's a lot of
Mhm.
truth to intermittent fasting, and I know you're seeing the
Mhm.
results of it. Absolutely. I think it's
Mhm.
a valid thing. Um,
Mhm.
but of course, I don't have the personal experience with it, but I'm intrigued. But
Mhm.
to get back to Robin, because just
Mhm.
on the conversation there, I'd love to get your opinion on, you had mentioned about belief and that Robin had brought that up. When it
Mhm.
comes to intermittent fasting, when it comes to journaling or whatever the tools that you've used to help you get to where you are now, how important
Mhm.
was belief in those systems to help you out?
Oh, well, journaling, not so much. I wasn't consistent at it. So I don't think it was a thing that I thought, will this work or will this not work? It
Okay.
was just, for me, it was just too much pain in the butt.
Right. Yeah,
And
I get that.
for the intermittent fasting, when my cardiologist said, he threw this book at me, the obesity code, and he said, buy this, do this, or buy this, read this, do this.
Right.
And I read it, and the science just made so much sense to me.
Okay.
I didn't have anything saying, well, this won't work. Like, I can't do this. And I've never really fasted. I mean, at one point in the early 2000s, I was 340 pounds. I needed to lose weight.
Wow.
And but I just read the book and it was just like, okay, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
I started very slowly because I had just come out of a heart surgery.
Yeah.
And I started at 12-12.
Wow.
Because I thought we'd have to adjust my medications. We didn't know how my body would respond.
Yeah.
And then, within a couple of months, I was doing 24 or 22.2 or.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, with the sorry, I'm all over the place today, but
that's okay.
You brought up a great point. For our chronic pain community, oftentimes creating a meal or meals can be really challenging, right? When you're in a lot of pain, especially when you're in a flare up. Did you find with the pain that you were living with that you had some difficulties adapting to the fasting plan? Or not plan, it's not a plan, but just as far as the lifestyle?
Not really. It was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be because really mindset is so important in fasting. Probably most other things too. Okay. But it just was working. I was so beat up from all these surgeries and all this brain trauma and that I was just giving it a shot.
Okay.
And surprisingly, it worked very quickly for me.
Good. And it's good to hear that it was manageable, the process, as far as diving into it. Because when it comes to food, it's really easy for people to get turned off, if it's too much effort or if it's too much restrictive, rules and boundaries and whatnot. So that's great to hear. Okay. Again, I'm going to get back to workshops of the day. Were there any ahas that you had, or I know we before we pressed record, you had mentioned you were talking to your psychology friends and the people around you who know this stuff, but what sort of takeaways are you pulling from the sessions that you saw today?
I think one of the big takeaways is what some people might see as woo-woo right now often turn out to be, 20 or 30 years, really solid science.
Right.
People poo-poo intermittent fasting because they can't make any money off it because there's no products to sell you.
Right.
But I mean, as humans, as we evolved, that's the way we ate. We had no guaranteed meals.
Right.
They weren't telling the kids in the cave to go out to the soccer fields and we'll give you orange slices and Kool-Aid.
Exactly.
If daddy found a dinosaur, you were eating. If he didn't, you were hungry.
No, it's so true. Yeah, I was raised in the fitness industry and health and wellness, and it was always the same message. You got to eat every 3 hours and and that was the standard. It's like, no, that's not what we've had for thousands of years. I don't get it. So I do think there's some truth to it. Okay, perfect. Anything else before we move on to the other presenters, anything else from Robin? Because Robin had a lot to share just around the process of therapy and EMDR in general, but anything else that you pulled?
Well, I was blown away by how many certifications or credentials she had.
Yeah.
Like it seemed like an endless list.
Yeah.
And, how do you choose which therapy you're going to use when you've got so many tools in your kit?
Yeah. Yeah. She just pulls. She's a gal that gets up. She starts work at 7 a.m. She works until 5 or 6 p.m. And she has a family. Like she's just a busy gal.
Yeah.
Sadly, because there are so many people living with trauma, right? There's just not enough Robins in the world at this point. So, okay. So, anything else? The other sessions you had today were Sarah Grace for the hypno healing. She's an amazing woman, but anything that you pulled from there that you thought was interesting or tied into the intermittent fasting or just was an aha in general?
I think, I've tried hypnotherapy in the past.
Okay.
And I guess because of my various brain traumas, I'm just not hypnotizable.
Right.
And Dr. Plie said she tried it even as a
Oh,
medical student,
yeah.
because you're supposed to try these things,
Yeah.
and she couldn't be hypnotized either. So
Right.
I think some people are more predisposed to it,
Right.
and it lets them break that conscious subconscious barrier
Right.
and get to things.
Hmm.
Um, I liked what she was talking about, what you see on stage or on TV
Hmm.
with the hypnotists that
Yeah,
can
it's
talk
not
you into clicking like a you know that's an entirely different thing. So don't let that influence you whether you think
right.
hypnotherapy may or may not be for you.
Right.
Your balancing point should be, could this possibly work for me?
Exactly, exactly. And worth a try. I think what I love about Sarah's approach is she obviously knows the biology, the human biology really well, being a nurse practitioner in her
Mm-hmm.
past. She knows trauma very well based on her personal experience. And I loved her analogy around how the subconscious and the conscious brain sort of work together.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that was some great examples. But okay, and then the other one, what was your other session for today? Sorry, I'm
Your sis-in-law.
oh my right. Who? I'm just kidding. All right. So was there anything that resonated with you in that session?
Yeah. She talked about how she thought, I think if I got this correct, she talked about how her parents were arguing a lot, and that sort of created a level of trauma that she carried with her
Mm-hmm.
going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect she didn't even know she
Right.
had that
No.
until she was older.
Yep.
And and that's interesting because I remember my parents arguing,
Mm-hmm.
but arguing is a spectrum,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? There's arguing, you
Yes.
forgot to pick up the dry cleaning versus
Yes.
you suck,
Yeah.
and
No, you're right. You're right. Great distinction to make.
yeah,
Really
that was
great.
Dr. Plie, not me.
Yeah. But no, it's important. And I know for a fact, being in the family, that she was only really exposing a little bit of what was happening. There was definitely a deep trauma. And what we did talk about off camera with my sister-in-law was really interesting to see. And I think for some of our listeners, I think I'd be interested to see what they thought. But during a pandemic, so not only did we
Mhm,
see this influx of chronic pain,
mhm.
anxiety, depression, obviously, increase in ADHD diagnoses, interestingly enough, but I witnessed it in my husband as well. And I didn't ask him for his permission to talk about him today, but
Oops.
oops, he's usually pretty good about it. But it was interesting to see in the pandemic during lockdown how if you were living with past trauma, how it really started to surface in many interesting ways
Mhm,
because we were all back into a fight or flight response at that point, right? Or at least most
mhm,
people. And so I think it's important for understand that when you are in a state of slight chaos, and even if you knew you lived with trauma or if you did not know, like you said, you weren't aware for a little while. I think there's a lot of
mhm,
people who were unaware that they've experienced whatever, big T, little T trauma
mhm.
is how it starts to creep up. Now, did you find in your experience, I mean, this might be a stupid question, but when it comes to the body and how trauma shows itself in the body, above and
Mhm.
beyond, the brain injury you'd been through, how did trauma show up in your body? Can you think of any examples?
Well, I think, my battles with weight and the constant pain and, the migraines that I would get and, all those things
Yeah.
that I just attributed to have, you know, come from playing hockey outside in Winnipeg weather for, 25 years
Right.
and playing rugby and football and being
Yeah.
so morbidly obese.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no link to me. Uh, that the brain trainer guys didn't suggest any link to me back in the 90s. And
Yeah.
the other doctors I've talked to uh, certainly did. So I didn't make that connection, but I can certainly see it now
Okay.
that we've talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good for you. We're not often given that opportunity to put the two together because it's, in a
Mhm,
6 minute, 10-minute appointment, we just,
mhm,
they don't. But also, I don't think our, medical community They now are starting to get better. We really are in a better position as far as being more trauma informed, being more chronic pain informed. But yeah, the whole somatic thing, the body, as far as how the emotions come into it. Do you ever hang out in those chronic pain support groups on Facebook? I don't know if you poke around in there. It's so interesting because there are so many people who are not necessarily fully understanding that the emotions do come out in the body. And if we could understand that, I think we'd be further ahead and are managing or coping with pain, trauma. Anyway, I'm on a bit of a ramble.
I do occasionally go into a brain trauma group.
Okay.
And I've done so well with my recovery that I almost feel guilty. And it's really hard to see these people who are struggling with finding resources and stuff like that. And all I can do is offer them intermittent fasting, and large majority of them think it's woo-woo.
Yeah. So are you? Yes, and I get that. I'm a coach. People are like, what does a coach do, right? But as far as the brain and the recovery from traumatic brain injury, have you had imaging done? Are they seeing evidence outside of what they see, sort of on the outside that you have done? Have they done any of that for you?
Amazingly, knowing that I had struck my head 20 times, I was not given an X-ray. I was not given a CAT scan.
Wow.
I was not given an MRI.
Wow.
I was not given any sort of concussion test, but I knew because of what had happened to me. Obviously, I had a whole series of concussions because of all the functionality that I lost.
Right. Isn't that interesting? I do think we are on the cusp of...
It's tragic.
It's tragic. Sorry, it is. And I think you are a good example of why we should start doing that. They are now doing the live brain imaging to not only understand how pain affects the brain, but also how trauma affects the brain. And they're taking it one step further. It is so hard to come by, though. They're taking that live brain imaging and actually using it to help in the recovery process. So, but hey, you are a living example that, you didn't necessarily, it would have been nice to have, but you found your own way, which is pretty incredible. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. Is there, in the interest of time, and I do apologize, actually, we've got some time. Was there anything that you felt was, that I may have glossed over that is important around intermittent fasting, or anything that you've learned in today's sessions that you thought was important?
I think intermittent fasting can help most people. And one of, besides doing the hormonal changes and lowering your basal insulin and, attacking the fatty liver, that's also one of the primary things it does. Yeah. Which helps normalize all your functions. But it's not helping my memory right now. What else?
That's okay. That's okay.
You will find your food taste change over time. Because the bacteria in your body, because your gut microbiome changes, and that goes all the way up into your mouth. So foods will taste different, and your bacteria are the source of cravings. Those little buggers are just smart.
Boy, they are smart, aren't they? Oh yeah.
Yeah. And you'll find yourself, without even trying, finding that ultra processed foods are not attractive to you anymore. And the processed oils, which are so toxic, also aren't attractive to you anymore.
Oh, so interesting.
So people find, oh my God, like chips are my go-to food. Yeah. But they just are so unpalatable now.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And foods people used to hate. And I'll just throw out broccoli or Brussels sprouts because those are the easiest ones to hate on. People are like, I can't help it. I'm just like roasting Brussels sprouts all the time. Throw some, olive oil on, some pepper or whatever. Yeah. And it's just so good.
Interesting. That is really interesting. What a great side effect, a good side effect, a good result of doing it. For anybody who is listening who may not have listened to Dr. Sarah's the Naturopath workshop, what's so powerful about your message too, Fred, is that the gut and the brain are really connected and really important in just our overall health. And so the intermittent fasting that you're doing is affecting both.
Mhm.
So because you're coming from traumatic brain injury, dealing with your stomach is actually a really smart approach, right? You are making
Mhm.
sure that part of healing the brain is healing the gut. And as you were talking
Yeah.
about, the microbiome is a really important little ecosystem that we need to nurture. And unfortunately, with stress, and there's no stress with
Yeah.
pain or trauma, right? There's no stress.
No. Dying is pretty stress-free. Coming
Dying,
back to life
yes.
part.
Yeah, pretty crazy. 20 times? Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and as far as things that you are noticing just around your digestion, because you are taking
Mhm.
care of that flora inside of your body, what sorts of things are you
Mhm.
noticing other than your palate?
Um, it's the elimination of decision fatigue. Like you don't realize how much effort you put into figuring out what you're going to eat, what your husband's going to eat, what your kids are going to eat, what the people coming over are going to eat, what you have to shop for, price shopping and price matching and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
When you scale it down to one meal a day,
Mm-hmm.
it just frees up your brain to do so many other things.
Right. Interesting. So I do know there is a small part of our population who will not be able to fast. And I can give you an example. My
Mm-hmm.
husband, for example, he has a rare metabolic disorder. He cannot
Mm-hmm.
metabolize the long-term fuels. He actually has to
Mm-hmm.
perpetually use the short-term fuels. So, for most, I would say intermittent fasting will definitely be a viable option, but I think it's important that we mention to read about it, to become informed about it, and talk to your doctor about it as
Mm-hmm.
well. They may not necessarily think that they may not understand it fully, but at least if you understand your underlying health conditions enough to be able to make that informed
Mm-hmm.
decision if it's going to work for you or not.
Yeah. So
So,
in 2018, when my cardiologist recommended Dr. Fung's book to me,
mhm.
um, everybody in his hospital in the cardiac ward were fans of intermittent fasting.
Good.
But he suggested it to me for weight loss. They had no idea that it
Mhm.
had all these other secondary, or I guess depending on which order you think things are
Yes.
happening, primary effects. Like
Yeah.
he didn't know anything about, the basal insulin levels going
Right.
down
Yeah.
and your ghrelin and leptin and your
Mhm.
speech impediments.
Me too. Don't worry.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
they just didn't know about it, and they're just starting to. But there are some great researchers like Mark Mattson at
Mhm.
Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
Uh, he's probably the grandfather of fasting research.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
Peter Attia, who I believe is originally from Toronto,
Oh, okay.
uh, and he's a longevity researcher and intermittent faster.
Okay.
Um, and there's something called the Zoe Project going on,
Okay.
and it's run by Tim Spector out of the UK,
Mhm.
and he's got some colleagues in the US.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, us Canadians cannot participate in the study,
Mhm.
but they are mapping how your body processes different foods
Ah,
in the hope that they'll be able to come up with a vaccine or a medication or something that can help your body optimize and process things more efficiently, more healthily.
interesting.
Um, but you should go on the Zoe site. They'll do a much better explanation of
Yeah.
explain
Okay. No,
what.
that's okay. Yeah, I'm writing this all down. That's amazing. Um, Barb, since you're with us, I'm just wondering if you have any questions, because Barb also, I'm just going to ask you to unmute. If you think there is something you wanted to ask Barb, this might be a good opportunity. Do you have any questions to ask Fred?
Um, I just wanted to say that I only died once, Fred, but I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You two will get along like fast friends.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that is very interesting to me as I have a lot of gastric issues caused by what started as a bowel obstruction
Mm-hmm.
concurrently with kidney failure and sepsis.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And my body has never come back. I
Mm-hmm.
still fight that, especially this week. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah,
So,
it is something I've wondered about, but I've never pursued.
Mhm.
well, are you in Toronto as well, Barb?
No, I'm in the beautiful little sleepy town of Goderich, Ontario.
Okay, so you're sort of in the neighborhood. Dr. Fung is actually a nephrologist.
Ah,
Oh, okay.
He operates out of Scarborough General. So,
Okay.
so he recommends intermittent fasting to so many of his patients, and he's
oh.
reversed their type 2. He's, saved people from losing their limbs from diabetes and sepsis, and he's saved people's kidneys. And so, he's a really, really good resource. There's a bit of a waiting list to get into him if you wanted to try that route, but
That's that's very good information for me, because it left me with a very rare kidney condition that causes 24/7 pain that's akin to a kidney stone.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. It's okay. I'm getting by, but it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Fung's got a lot of books out. He's got videos all over the internet, so you can find out a lot about what he does.
I think we got some
thank
research
you.
to do. We got some reading to do, Barb.
Yes,
You and me
thank you.
both. Well, thank you for the question. That's amazing. All right. Well, we are starting to wind down our time here. Fred, was there anything else you wanted to mention to our listeners? Anything we may have missed?
If you're struggling with something, there's likely somebody out there that can give you some sort of relief. Maybe not 100%, but the world, despite what you see on the news media, is full of people that would just love to help you. The people that became my community, I really didn't know when I first got sick, and they just stepped up and took me in and supported me. And there's likely people like that just waiting for you to ask or present yourself.
Absolutely.
So,
that's probably the best way we could end off, is that you're not alone and there is help, right? It's just a matter of, that's why we're doing the summit. Learning different approaches, hearing different people's stories often ignites that spark. So thank you, Fred. I'm really glad you got to come on here, and thank you for helping us out. It was a big ask to have you listen on other sessions and to show up live. And so I really appreciate it. And thank you, Barb, for coming too.
Thank you.